Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Sterling Live. My name is Caitlin Brower. I'm Sterling's social media manager and your host of Sterling Live. I'm so excited to be back for another episode. We've had a really busy summer with episodes of Sterling Live, but they've all been great, and I'm so excited. And trust me, there's more to come into August and September. But today is a really important episode for us, a very special episode. So I'm so excited to have my guest here with me today. Today we have Luc van Dijk, Director of Business Development for SterlingBackcheck. And our topic today is, we are recognizing the International Day of the World's Indigenous Peoples. So Luc, thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Sterling Live. Can you go ahead and introduce yourself to our audience?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi everyone. My name is Luc van Dijk. I've been with Sterling for over 6 years. 6 years now. I've worn many different hats, but I'm currently the director of business development in Canada. So what my team and I do is to effectively be involved in all growth and development opportunities that involve Canada, often supporting both local and international teams. And we work out a lot of the core strategies, focus points, and really evaluate where the market is heading inside of Canada, but also ultimately where Canada slots in with the rest of the world.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining me on this episode. As I said, it is a very special episode, and Luc has an incredible story to tell. So I'm so excited to get into it. Before we do, though, I do, when we do these types of recognition episodes and kind of raising awareness and talking about our stories, sharing our stories, I do like to read Sterling's diversity and inclusion statement. So we are committed to diversity and inclusion by championing and accepting individual uniqueness and cultivating a safe culture of belonging so that everyone can perform at their best in support of our clients, candidates, and the communities we serve. So, we do this with our people first environment, our inclusive culture, and marketplace and engagement as well. So I do always love reading that statement, prior to getting into the meat of these episodes. But with that being said, let's go ahead and get into it. I do want to remind our audience real quickly, though, if you are watching live on Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube, if you have any questions for Luc during the show, please go ahead and pop them in the comment section across all three of these platforms, and I will get them over to him as I see fit throughout our conversation. So let's go ahead and get into it. So to start things off, Luc, what does this day mean to you?
Yeah, so really this day, it's a central event. It's a key day where we really recognize and celebrate the many Indigenous groups that exist. When we consider the history and the diversity of the various Indigenous communities across Canada and internationally, but we also really take the time to reflect about the realities that they're often faced
Mhm.
with. Here in Canada, especially over the last couple of years, we've gotten a lot more honest with ourselves, a lot more direct about it when it comes to just everything that happened, which can only really be described as atrocities. And really importantly, how they didn't happen that long ago. Like a sad fact that I always remind people of is that it was when season 2 of Friends was being aired, residential schools were still open. And that was still a reality inside of Canada.
Right.
So now, more and more we're seeing the real horrors of what happened, just how many and how so many Indigenous voices have been and continue to be really silenced. So as much as it is a day where we do celebrate their resilience, we celebrate their contributions, their history, it's also a day where we really have to ask ourselves and tell ourselves we have to do better. How can
Mhm.
we do better? And to really make sure that we take the steps, because we're not there yet. We really need to start taking the steps in more earnest to make sure that the truth and really reconciliation can really happen. So it's a very long-winded way of me to say that it's an incredibly complex day for me. It involves a lot of
Mhm.
introspection and just a lot of asking myself, especially as a father, asking like, what can we do to make sure that we do better, and what can we do to educate everyone
Right.
around us?
Yeah. I think like something that stood out to me from what you said there was like being honest with ourselves because it is not always the easiest thing to do, but if it can better, our communities and better everyone, it is something that is critical for us to really kind of just look in the mirror, understand, what's going on around us.
Yeah.
So, can you provide a brief overview of, your work, your relationship with organizations representing certain Indigenous communities and citizens within Canada?
Yeah, absolutely. So over the years, I've really had the pleasure of being able to work with just dozens of Indigenous communities across Canada, and it really has allowed me to get a better understanding of the reality when it comes to employment screening, when it comes to identity verification, and even just how complex the hiring process can be for a lot of these communities. One of the examples that we often hear, we've heard this repeatedly, is that like manual ID verification processes in Canada, they just don't really work for BIPOC
Mm.
communities as a whole. They can struggle with getting access to physical IDs, especially for communities that live on reserves, for example. It can be really tricky to get there. And this is obviously a very significant blocker to employment. So, we've heard that some providers will then try to push back, saying, "Well, it's not that difficult. It's just go to your local registration agency, problem solved." But that's a really out of touch approach, and it's really out of touch to what living in these reservations in these rural communities, but even sometimes for these communities that are in more urban settings, and even just based on the past experiences that these communities have had with these kind of processes, with these type of agencies, it's not a simple ask. So really, what I've been focusing on, what my team has been focusing on, is really to help educate the industry to the realities of these communities, so that we can start communally addressing and finding solutions to them. Similarly, we've done all that we can to create a network of support for these communities and connecting them with organizations that are looking for more guidance. Because
Mhm.
the reality is that there's a lot of organizations, big and small, public, private, crown organizations, everything, that are still kind of just moving about trying to find the right solution, and they don't have it, they don't know it. So it's not uncommon for them to reach out to us looking for more clarity, really looking for ways that they can do better, to make sure their policies make sense, to ensure the support is going to the right parties, but they're really just struggling with the execution due to the structures they're operating in. So where we can, we focus on connecting these organizations with their local Indigenous communities, so they can get more direct guidance, they can get best practice information, help set up training and education seminars, and really come to terms with the reality of their local groups. So to summarize, really what we've been doing for these various groups, nations, bands, is that we've just been active listeners. We've had to be,
Right.
and especially for me personally, like I moved to Canada from the Netherlands, and the simple reality is, when I came here, I knew nothing about Indigenous communities. I really, they don't teach you about them in the Netherlands.
Mm.
So it was a very rude awakening, realizing like, hey, these communities exist and this is what's happened to them and this is their realities. So really, I've done all I can to make up for lost time, and the best way to achieve growth, when engaging with these communities, is by being an active listener. Listen, retain the information, connect the dots, and really make the connections and aim to improve and educate both myself but also the groups that
Right.
we work with. So that's really what we've been focusing on.
So, given that you said you didn't know anything when you came to Canada, how did this originally get started then?
Really good question. So yeah, when I moved to Canada, like you said, I really didn't know anything about Indigenous communities in Canada. But I was exceptionally fortunate that when I first came here, I actually went to the University of British Columbia, an institute that does a really decent job at acknowledgement and education around Indigenous communities. And this gave me the opportunity to meet several other people involved with these communities who helped me get me more involved. And I got to attend a few ceremonies over the years, including a kind of waking ceremony in Vancouver, and I really started connecting with some of the members of the communities there, just asking a lot of questions, listening to what they had to share. And through conversation, the topic really of my profession came up. And as we were kind of discussing that, to be very open, I received a lot of very critical questions
Right.
around it. And these are all questions that I really hadn't considered at the time, and I actually had to take it back. I didn't have an answer. I had to go back to work the next day, talk to some of the other team members here in Canada, and actually had to come back to a lot of the members of that community a week later with more information, some next steps that we could offer, what we can do, how we can try and make a difference, how we can try to resolve some of the issues that they're experiencing. And then suddenly, shortly after that, I started getting calls at work by some
Right.
members of these communities and some of the other like neighboring groups, basically asking us for some assistance in setting up programs, and in some cases even asking us an assistance when it came to educating hiring parties. Saying like, hey, this organization we know that you're working with, we don't think they fully understand how this process works for us. Would you mind maybe connecting with them? So we started getting a lot of that kind of engagement. So that was really the start of the journey. And honestly, I cannot emphasize enough how thankful I am for the people, for the communities that
Mhm.
took the time to help educate myself, my team, and just everyone here at Sterling, to tell us their realities and to tell us what the barriers were, because that's really how this got started.
Relating to, this entire experience, what does it mean for you and all of us at Sterling to live up to our values?
Yeah, that's always a good question. So for us here, like we talk about them quite a bit in Canada, and the reality is it really means to embody them and to remind ourselves that that's the goal, right? That the goal is to live them, to be them, to breathe them, and you really have to keep reminding yourself of these the central values till it becomes a habit for every something that you do in every engagement. And it really means that with every interaction, it's not about us.
Right.
It's really that simple. It's about the people we're supporting. It's about their programs, their realities. It's about being an active listener in these conversations, taking all the information in, and working with our incredibly dedicated and knowledgeable teams to come up with the best possible solutions for these groups, for our clients, for everyone involved. Sometimes it's easy. We have to come back. We have great news. Everyone's happy. But other times it's extremely difficult when we have to share the reality of the industry. And then the reality sometimes is the industry is still catching up with the
Mhm.
reality of BIPOC communities. But even when that happens, the values are, they keep us on track. They are always in our mind, and it's all about the people. We start with trust. We prove it every day. The client is always in the room, and those three values for me always help me focus on the fourth: deliver results. They matter. And that's really what it comes to, the work, the progress. It never stops us from being able to be better, from to do better.
I love these episodes so much, not only because we do raise awareness around, certain issues and recognition and things like that, but we do get to prop up our values. And I think the work that we do every day ties back to all four of them, which is incredible. I've never been a part of an organization where all of the individuals are, achieving one goal and these four values. We can all say that we're doing them and it's proven. And you're talking about it right now. And that's why I truly love sitting down with so many of our employees on, these types of episodes, because it really is powerful to get our message out there and to show what we're doing. And on that note, you mentioned a couple of examples earlier, with kind of outlining the overview of your relationship with these communities and kind of what we've been doing. I do want to dive into that a little bit more and, working with some of our clients, what is some of the feedback that you've heard from our clients over the years, especially where they needed assistance?
Yeah, the key one really, what it comes down to is that we were there. Like
Mm,
that seems like an easy answer, but it's very in depth. It's not just that we were there to answer an email, to pick up the phone, but more that we were actually there to listen, to engage,
mhm,
to understand. We weren't trying to effectively shove a square peg through a round hole. We accepted that a lot of the standard solutions didn't fit, and that
mhm,
we did have to get creative, and we were willing to get creative. So we really engaged a lot of these communities, not from us taking a teacher role, but very much as a student, saying, okay, explain to us what's happening, explain what you're seeing, explain the difficulties and the barriers and the impact that it's having. And as we gathered that data, we took it back inside. We talked to the experts, we talked to the other partners of. Involved in the industry to then come back with, okay, here's something that we've considered, here's a new potential solution, but it's still ongoing. So especially when we consider some of our clients, like the North American Indigenous Games, this is an example which we're a very proud sponsor of.
mhm,
I can safely say we went above and beyond. When we think about the Sterling team that really took point there, led by Daryl Santos, a fantastic team lead here in Canada, who manages a whole group of account managers, and supported by our Canadian nonprofit and support specialists like Ian Murray. They really went above and beyond to make sure that they evaluated every angle of the program, every
right.
consideration, everything that was involved, and they really confirmed that we set up the best program available. We set up the best support network that they could have, and we really made sure that at the end of the day, we were there if anything happened. We were being very proactive. We always had an ear to the door and just made sure that we could do anything that they needed to make sure that the program was a success. And so yeah, like ultimately we were there. Our team is always available to help, to provide the guidance, to listen, and to come up with solutions. We don't shy away from the difficult conversations. We don't settle. I hate this term so much. We don't settle with the "that's how we've always done it" excuse. It's
Right.
one of those things that we've heard. The communities have heard saying, "Well, that's how we've always done it." Tough, and we don't accept that. Like just because we've always done that doesn't mean it's a good solution. Sometimes it means we've always done that because the privilege of the situation made it most convenient, but it
Right.
doesn't fit for everyone. So we're ultimately just always ready to get creative. We're always ready to deliver results, and that's the feedback that we've been getting.
I love to hear that. You mentioned, the phrase like seeking guidance. How are these clients, coming to us for guidance? What are they looking for?
Yeah, so they're often looking for a partner who understands what's going on and who's actually given it some thought, and to kind of see, what have you come up with that can help? Because a lot of time because they haven't encountered it yet, they know the issues, they don't know the solutions. So it's
Mm,
a lot of like, what can we do? What have we not considered? But then they're also looking for understandings around what other provinces, what are areas, what communities, what they're doing. So it's not uncommon for us to get, for example, a band from Saskatchewan asking us, "Hey, we're having this issue. We know that you're working with a group in BC. Are our realities similar, or is it a completely different scenario?" And then we can kind of get that conversation started. We can help make those critical connections, especially on more provincial levels, and we can really connect them and connect those dots. Because the reality is, end of the day, we don't have all the answers. We
right.
don't. We try our best. We get creative, but the best thing that we can do really there is to connect them and make sure that there is an understanding of the core issues that we have to resolve. Another real key thing that they often ask us about is what are the pitfalls? For especially for communities that are just looking to get these kind of programs set up, or even organizations, just regular enterprise organizations operating in Canada, they'll often ask us for guidance around like what are the pitfalls when we
Mhm.
start looking at it, Indigenous or just BIPOC hiring in general. What are things we have to consider? What are some of the alterations we have to make to the program to make sure we can properly cover that? And that's a very difficult and very important conversation to have because if you kind of look at it from a very base level and say whatever standard mold will fit everything, no worries, the reality is it doesn't, and you're actually shutting a lot of people out.
Right.
We also often get the questions of like, what's the norm? Like, how does this normally work? And then we get the pleasure of telling them is there is no norm. Like
Mhm.
we will work with you, we'll create something custom, but the reality is that in this space there really isn't much of a norm. We have to get creative each time, and with that there are some difficulties, of course, and we walk them through that. We explain it. We show them how we've navigated it, how we've tried to resolve it as much or mitigate it as much as we can. But it's just those kind of those conversations that are critical. And the key thing that we've heard time and time again is that not many organizations are sadly having these
Right.
conversations yet. Like they're finally starting to pick up some steam in the broader industry and in other industries as well, but they're not where they need to be yet. So that's something that we're actively working on.
I loved what you said earlier about not, doing it because this is how we've always done it. We're not, going to stick to that. You don't like that phrase. I don't like it either. You got to adapt. You got to move forward. So on that, how has Sterling adapted our processes now then to help these clients?
Yeah, so I know I've said this so many times, but we've gotten so creative. So when
Yeah.
working with these Indigenous communities in Canada, the programs can vary wildly. And I found that the best thing to do is to treat each one as its own unique case. So really with helping these communities set up, so as an example, I've helped communities set up teaching programs in partnership with local school boards, where they're effectively screening the elders, because
Okay.
ultimately it makes perfect sense. They're the custodians of their culture and history. But when you start looking at that kind of case, you start noticing that we'll often find that that also means that they're not comfortable. A lot of the elders are not comfortable with what they consider police processes. It makes them really uneasy. They don't like it. There's a lot of history there, and there can also be on top of that a bit of a technology gap. So where they're more comfortable proceeding with paper forms or or other custom
Hmm.
processes like that. Or maybe if it's a rural community, they don't even have steady access to a computer. That's something that we've heard of as well.
Right.
So here's where we really work closely with the program owners. Do we need to modify the language? Do we need to modify the consent language? Do we need to kind of adjust what the forms state? Often we need to clarify, like, what are we doing with the data? Because understandably, they're very concerned about that. So we have to walk them
Hmm.
through it, explain it, help customize it. Yeah, and in some cases, like, should we provide them with paper forms that the program owner can actually take? We've had this happen where a program owner will take all the paper forms with customized language and then go visit every member of the community that needs to be screened, and does that in a day, comes back in a day, sends us all the forms, and we can proceed. And we've even had it in some cases where we create or set up the processes internally to help support a program owner who, as an example, will take a tablet with them, hotspot it to a phone, and then go visit everyone as well to try and get it done, help them through the process, and really just make sure that they've covered everyone as much as possible. So really what we here at Sterling also benefit from ultimately for these types of projects is just how large we are.
Yeah.
The reality is we've got a significant global team, we've got specialized regional teams on top of that, and that really gives us access to a lot of different tools, a lot of different platforms, a lot of solutions that we otherwise simply wouldn't have. That really lets us go through our toolbox to find the best solution for the case. And here in Canada, we see that we've got several different platforms available. We've got some different ID verification tools, different verbiages that we've used over the years, and we get to go through this toolbox and go through it with the program owners and really take a look and be like, does this fit? Is this the right shape to go through the square hole? Like, what do we need to consider? And that really lets us have that conversation in a very detailed way, a very analytical way of, like, here's everything that we've got. Which tool fits
Hmm.
best, or which combination of tools fits best to cover
Yeah.
what you need. And that's really like it's our willingness to explore these solutions that have really put us apart, and it's really helped us make a difference in these communities.
It's just great to hear, that we are having these conversations, we are listening, and then, like you just said, we're looking at everything Sterling has and putting it in place, in potentially different ways, certain ways, things like that. So it's really great to hear that all of this is stemming from just us sitting down and having the conversation and listening and trying to understand how we can help people. Because at the end of the day, that's what Sterling's doing. We're here to
Yeah.
help people. So love to hear that for sure. I want to move into now, what's next? I always love asking that question to all of my guests, as we move towards the future. So, Luke, what goals do you have as you continue your partnership with these communities?
Yeah, so ultimately, it's to continue and grow these partnerships further to take it to the next level. A lot of success that we've had is through word of mouth, which is how
Mhm.
a lot of these communities do communicate and do pass this information on. We've had conversations with the Indigenous Services of Canada as well and other key groups, and I really want to continue this, and I really want to take it up a notch.
Yeah.
So I think as an industry, it's really important that we take the feedback, their input, and we take it up with other key groups in the industry. That includes even organizations like the Professional Background Screening Association, the Digital Identification and Authentication Council of Canada, and other communities, as well as partners, and even realistically in the future, having these roundtable conversations with some of our competitors in the market
Yep.
and saying, like,
Mhm.
here's what we've done, here's the framework that we need to build so that we can really build a structure that works for everyone and not just the standard.
Of
Because the
course.
reality is that you can't approach background screening with the assumption of, well, the standard needs to fit for everyone. It does
Mhm.
not work. And especially when we consider requirements around verifications, for example, in some of these communities, nobody has really figured out a solid, scalable solution that could work. I know with some educational institutes in Canada, they really want to make sure that scholarships, programs, support policies, all of these that they're implementing, they're actually impacting and yeah, benefiting the right communities and groups. And this was brought to us as how do we do this? How do we make sure that we have the most impact? And the reality is, no one's figured it out. Like, it sparked a very big conversation internally of how, and
Yeah.
then there's a lot to consider. We didn't just want to blunder through it, and we reached out to other partners in our network and other organizations to see if anyone had found a good solution, and just to find out that just about every organization we spoke to basically went, we know exactly what you're talking about. We've had that same inquiry. We have no idea.
Right.
We don't know. We don't have a solid solution. And then when talking to some of the Indigenous communities about these kind of cases, they themselves don't really have a one size fits all. They often recommend, start talking with the elders. They have a lot of info. They can kind of help guide these organizations as how can you have the best impact. But even then, they were open in admitting, but that isn't a foolproof system. There's a lot to consider there. So the important thing here is we got the conversation going because previously all these organizations were working in silos, acknowledging, yeah, there's an issue, we don't have a solution, let's move on. But by connecting all these dots and starting this conversation, we really expanded it and ensured that there is actually some momentum. Like here for us
Mhm.
internally, we included our ops teams, of course. We're still talking about it now. But any solution that we try and create, it has to be made in collaborative spirit. It has to be done with
Right.
partnership with these communities, but also with other key organizations in the industry, because that's the only way that we can actually make significant change. That's just a reality. So we've already come a long way from where we started, but there's always room for improvement. That's not going to end. And the goal here, my goal, my team's goal, is to make sure that we keep focused on that there is room for improvement. We should not
Mhm.
rest on our laurels. And I'm honestly incredibly thankful for the Sterling team in general for agreeing with that. We're never happy enough. We're always thinking, okay, that's
Yeah.
nice. What can we do better?
Yeah.
And we keep that conversation alive.
My team is always asking what's next. I know you guys are doing that as well. I love hearing the goals. I love talking about, the momentum that you've had. But again, like you said, there's still so much more that we can accomplish here. Is there anything in progress right now that you can share with us?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I previously mentioned, one of the big benefits of Sterling is just the sheer size of our organization and talent pool, the experience and knowledge that comes with it. So recently, I was actually working on a global opportunity together with several other members of our regional teams, to Quebec, US, Australia, you get the idea. And in talks with our Australian representative, Mick Roche, who on a side note, simply fantastic, incredibly knowledgeable individual. He brought up that there were a lot of similar projects and considerations around Aboriginal communities in Australia. So we actually ended up comparing notes very briefly and found a
Love
lot of
that.
similarities.
Mhm.
It was awesome. It was that realization of like we're not working in silos. Like this is not just a Canadian problem. This is a
Right.
problem everywhere. And we even found out like when we didn't know what do we do, we go to the elders. It was the exact same answer from both of us. So we in that conversation, we really talked briefly about the importance of our experiences, our involvement, and really how we should be showcasing it more as an organization. So how we should be more proactive in sharing that expertise with a lot of our clients that are making
Mhm.
central decisions, that are making central documents about this. So really what we want to do is that we want to start documenting a lot of this information and a lot of the best practices on a more global level to create a way to bring some awareness of this to a global audience involving these organizations that have offices everywhere from Canada to Australia, the US, anywhere really. And as a global organization, Sterling, of course, works with a lot of these international companies, and this is just one of the many ways that we can help make a difference there, both for the organizations, but more importantly, in my opinion, for the communities. So we
Right.
can help expand these conversations. We can help make these key connections in many different regions and ensure that the right people are involved. And this simply isn't something that can be solved in a silo. It's very important. There's absolutely no way that it can be done without having these communities be in the room and leading us, giving us the info, and with us being active listeners, explaining the key issues, the barriers, so that really we here at Sterling, we can focus on what we're best at, which is getting creative. Like get
Yeah.
creative, find a solution. So that's a very long-winded way of saying that I'm effectively trying to connect all the dots with the different organizations, or sorry, different representatives in Sterling globally that have had similar experiences, and seeing if we could create a central doc to help global organizations kind of traverse through this and help make those connections.
Yeah, I mean, being a global company, it's a key differentiator for us on many parts. So it's really awesome to hear that, you're sitting down with your counterparts across the world and you are comparing notes and you're seeing similarities and you are, again, trying to solve problems and to work for our clients, work for these communities. So I think that's a great progress or something that's coming out that you're sharing with the audience right now. I think that's, it is really great to see, what's coming there for sure. All right. Well, Luke, this has been a tremendous conversation. I've learned a ton. It's so great to see what we've done, what we've been able to accomplish, what's coming next. So with that being said, I want to gather some final thoughts from you, but real quickly, if you are watching live on Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube, if you have any final questions for Luc, please go ahead and get them over right now in the comment section across these 3 platforms. As we wait for any final questions to come in, Luc, final thoughts from you today.
Yeah, final thought is the work never stops. It's the
Yeah.
reality, and we've made good progress. But as I mentioned, we're not going to rest on our laurels. We're going to keep this going,
Mm,
and it's just key that we just keep making the connections. There's no way that we can fix this in a silo. Not us as a team, not me individually, definitely not. But even just Sterling Canada, we need the whole organization, the whole industry to really keep working on this and to really make significant impact and success. We have to keep talking to the Indigenous communities, and we have to let them take leadership there and let them tell us what they need. Like, what are they running into? What do they need? What can we do? And as an organization, ultimately, the reality is, especially in background screening, we're often shackled to the regulations of the country, but we do have a role of communicating and helping educate the key decision makers in that country. So we need to take all that information, we need to take all that feedback, and we just need to keep
mm.
effectively directing it to the right groups. And that's really what we have to keep doing day in, day out.
So, as we wrap up today's episode and on this International Day of the World's Indigenous Peoples, I would like to thank Luc for coming on and sharing his story. I would like to thank him and his entire team for all of the work that you are doing and that you continue to do. Thank you to the communities for allowing Sterling to listen and to be a part of your programs and trying to adapt and move things forward. And, thank you to our audience for tuning in live. But with that being said, it's been another amazing episode of Sterling Live. I will be back. Luc, I will be tapping you again. Probably you will be back on Sterling Live. But thank you to our audience. Thank you, Luc. And I hope everyone has a really great day.